Now, hello, I am Robert Ogilvy, Executive EQ Coach. Glad you guys could join me for the Leadership Lunchtime live stream. It's lunchtime somewhere. I'm filming this just a few minutes before 10 a.m. Atlantic, so I guess it was recently lunchtime in England. Yeah. Anyway, glad you guys are here. So what are we talking about today? There are some major trends. You could say 8 major trends. There's actually lots of ways you could slice and dice it. They're going on in organizations, and you guys should be aware of it. And this is the stuff that differentiates who is high performing or not, who is actually able to do innovation well, but also who is able to be progressive and impactful, right? Who is thinking about the community and others and sustainability, and who's not. So we did the first four in the previous video, and now here in the second video we'll cover the other four, five to eight. All right, so let's just dive right in. Number 5, rules and control are giving way to freedom and trust. This partly has to do with the cueing signals of the classic and I would say kind of dangerous norms of how we typically approach management, and the precedent that sets. So I mean, maybe this is a good time to recap. Where does command and control have value, and where does it start to lose value, right? So when it's something only very kind of tightly and clearly behavioral, and there's kind of safety outcomes, command and control has some value. But as it becomes more intellectual and tangible and more kind of performancy, that doesn't work. So, in particularly as you're asking people to not just do more creative, curious work, but be engaged and give a damn about the work they're doing. This is part of how you're empowering them with their own freedom and choices, right? So part of that has to do with freedom and choices in terms of more and more able to prove themselves and be more personally self-managed, team self-managed, and eventually maybe even self-governing over the nature of how they add value. That's actually a pretty tall order. Not every one or every team gets there, certainly, but it's possible. And that's related to freedom needs, their own impulse to take on challenges and self-actualize and want good choice in front of them. And then relationally, from a management end of things, this relates to basically how we're setting up norms around trust and what management. I would say more than anything, how management is relating to them, right? And I say that because it's like every process could be done in a way that is more trusting or less trusting. And if I just said here was the rote thing that builds trust, no, because trust is it's a relational experience, right? And there's lots of people even that would take very good-hearted notions of agile and just turn this into kind of these controlledly kind of status meetings, right? But that's the impulse of this. We want more freedom in our work, and we want teams that we can trust and feel. I think safe is maybe too black and white a word, but I would say feel engaged and have good rapport with which helps us work better. So anyway, so this is an important trend. Next, number 6, we have centralized authority is giving way to distributed decision making. I'm actually going to use the term distributed cognition or embodied cognition here, right? As there's trends, activities, changes in more places at kind of more subtle or higher levels. We need decision making happening in more places, right? And this is not just revealing the classic kind of faults of hierarchy, but it's like we need places we need people and teams and units that can be autonomous enough to be able to respond to that, right? And that also actually begs the question of they need to amp up their group processes. So I'll give you a snapshot actually of how group processes actually boost performance, right? So if you think of there's a bell curve of individual performance, right? And you're normally somewhere along the middle, but you could be higher or lower, right? What teams actually, pragmatically we know that they boost performance, right? But part of the way they do that is they up the mean and they tighten the variance, right? So it's like the team itself, and this is where the skill and the diversity of your team comes into play, is part of that quality control mechanism, right? Which means as you're thinking and making decisions, discussing data and discussing tensions, that's like the intelligence and the wisdom of your team coming out, right? So that's again why a lot of self-organizing, self-managed organization systems and models are very big on not just sensing, what problems are we seeing and feeling, and then what various proposals could we possibly do, and discussing how do we feel about that, and then so they tend to differ on how much you kind of empower an individual to make some autonomous choice, deal with ramifications, versus how much you want consensus. I think the right answer actually goes more towards consensus, but there is something where the complexity that we're mired within is more complex than ever. And so it's not just distributed decision making that individuals and teams can make more decisions, but it's the distributed cognition of we actually need to be thinking about this in better ways. Some of my future work actually gets more into that. All right, just time check. Okay, we're just before 5 minutes. Number 7, secrecy. In lieu of, as we move towards radical transparency. I actually think this is part of the magic of why authentic leadership works. So when I was doing a lit review about 6 years ago in 2014, people definitely knew of authentic leadership. It was still trying to prove itself in terms of empirically supported evidence, empirically supported research. And I actually think this is it. And so part of what authentic leadership is saying is that, look, listen, if you want to be a good leader, part of it is actually to be able to be um, human and upfront and honest, but part of that also means kind of like straightforward about your strengths and particularly your weaknesses, right? And so that might seem kind of counterintuitive for executives, but it definitely is good in a relating sense that someone is being upfront with you, and they also have a clear view of kind of what they can and can't do. In that way, it demonstrates self-awareness. But here's actually, I think, the actual magic of that. I think what authentic leadership actually does is that by getting ahead of problems and setting a precedent that you kind of won't lie and elaborate or trying to kind of like squelch and control problems and assume people won't find it. They will. We live in the modern internet area. People are going to find out all your dirty little secrets. Um, Authentic leadership in that way is preventative damage control against reputation damage, and really it's like by setting an ethical precedent of I'm not going to lie and manipulate, I'm going to be upfront about my strengths. There's also something in authentic leadership, if it could work well and if stakeholders and shareholders could have a fair-minded view, where it's relieving executives of, as I would say, the burden of being these kind of perfect supermen and women that can't make mistakes, because executives really do feel that. Executives, particularly in growing industries, are playing a very high stakes. You might even almost say political game of or optics game of how they're looking at how high status they are. That's one of the things that we need to um, cure and get rid of, right? And how do we do that? I actually have some friends that are working on agile governance, right? And so what it becomes about is how you, as a board member, as a shareholder, are trying to have various impactful initiatives, but try to set up the context again, in the same way that much of setting up a good team, setting up a good context, set up a good executive team so that they can actually thrive, and not expecting them to be these perfect supermen. Anyway, I think I've touched on that enough. The last one, we're moving from job descriptions to talents and mastery. I love that because I'm a nerdy cat myself. I have lots of friends with doctoral degrees and engineering professionals and such. And so I love when people have great skills, but I also love to see when they're continually developing. And in fact, one of the things I've really come to hate is this notion that no, I've learned at some point in my life and now I'm done learning. And whether that means personally you're done learning or whether the tables are turned, now everyone needs to listen to me, that actually really repulses me. It's against this notion of continuous learning, and really I would say continuous curiosity. That's one of my jams, right? And so, and if you look at even the nature of micro-credentialing and I would say the education and talent demand, we know that people are supposed to be building up skills and going through their career throughout their lifetime. I think one of the big failings here is that we're realizing the post-secondary system really isn't up to the challenge. And so we've had to bottom up and kind of cheaply and on the side find these other ways to approach continuous learning. And I would also say repackage and reconfigure skills as we hit different kind of points and industries in our career, to say it's like, okay, well, I used to frame my skill set like this, now I can frame it like that because it's using other transferable skills, but there isn't some clear kind of linear path, and teams are more hybrid and cross-functional, but people are more hybrid and cross-functional. I know Tim Ferriss really talks about this, and lots of people talk about this notion of being a generalist specialist and how you do that. And so we all really need to manage that now. So the good thing is, getting rid of job descriptions and going towards talents and mastery means that we all get to job craft and bake our own jobs and careers to some small or large degree. We have more influence over how we're working, even if that's in a staff or employment context, right? And the bad thing is that also kind of means we're subject to how good or not so progressive we can be in our learning and development. So in Myers-Briggs terms, it's really the ENTPs, ENFPs, INFPs, which are really killing it in the innovation of things. It's not the ENTJs and the ESTJs. Those are good managers, but they're not actually good continuous learners, right? Anyway, there's lots more we could riff on here. I think that's enough for now. Again, this is the second half of the 8 trends you need to know if you're going to run a high-performing, innovative, and really progressively impactful organization. I'm Robert Ogilvy, Executive EQ Coach. I'll see you guys next time.